In 1993, a devastating famine ravaged the East African nation of Somalia. A massive humanitarian crisis unfolded, prompting a United Nations relief force, backed by American troops, to enter the region and protect vital food shipments from being hijacked by local factions. To handle the rising violence, the U.S. deployed Task Force Ranger. Looking at these soldiers, you see a heavily equipped, deeply confident unit comprising Delta Force operators and Army Rangers. They were widely considered the absolute best of the best, operating with an aura of near invincibility. Their objective for October 3rd was highly specific. As seen in this photograph, the human targets were two key lieutenants loyal to the hostile Somali warlord Muhammad Farah Aidid. The goal was a swift 60-minute snatch-and-grab raid right in the middle of the capital, Mogadishu. This overhead tactical blueprint shows exactly how the assault was supposed to unfold. Delta Force operators would land directly on the target building. Simultaneously, 4 units of Army Rangers, known as Chalks, would fast rope down to secure a defensive perimeter at the 4 corners of the block. On paper, the operation was highly orchestrated. Command viewed it as a clean, top-down geopolitical objective, completely disconnected from the raw, unpredictable reality of the sprawling city beneath them. Initially, the raid went like clockwork. Delta Force stormed the building and secured the enemy targets in roughly 15 minutes. But that early precision masked a fatal complacency. Convinced this would be a simple Sunday drive home, many soldiers left their heavy night vision goggles and extra canteens of water back at the base. They fully expected to be done before dinner. Then, a rocket-propelled grenade fired from the streets below found its mark. A Black Hawk helicopter was struck, sending it spinning out of control until it crashed deep inside hostile territory. The exact second that helicopter hit the dirt, the original raid ended. The political objective evaporated, instantly replaced by the chaotic reality of surviving an urban war zone. Command immediately shifted gears. Looking at this Black Hawk in flight, we understand the sudden vulnerability of the operation. The mission pivoted entirely from an offensive extraction into a defensive combat search and rescue operation to protect the downed crew. This street map of Mogadishu illustrates how quickly the situation deteriorated. Half a mile away from the first crash, a second Black Hawk was targeted and shot down. The military's focus and resources were suddenly split across 2 entirely separate, isolated locations. Command dispatched ground convoys to rescue the downed crews, but the city's layout turned against them. With bad directions and blocked roads, the vehicles became hopelessly lost in a maze of unfamiliar streets. Intense crossfire and heavily defended barricades effectively stopped the vehicles in their tracks. Sustaining massive damage, the convoys became combat ineffective and were forced to retreat back to base, leaving the men on the ground completely isolated. On the ground, the stranded troops faced an overwhelming numerical disadvantage. This image captures the heavily armed, localized resistance that swarmed the Americans. Thousands of Somali militia members surrounded the crash sites, firing from rooftops, windows, and alleys. The assumption of absolute technological superiority dissolved. High-tech aviation and elite tactical training were suddenly neutralized by the sheer volume of opposing fighters and the dense vertical geography of urban warfare. As night fell, the missing gear became a critical liability. Without the heavy night vision equipment they had left behind, the American soldiers were practically blind in the pitch-black streets, giving the local militia a massive advantage as they closed in. The troops hunkered down inside nearby buildings. Sitting in absolute darkness, breathing in the metallic smell of blood from their wounded, the soldiers realized no immediate help from their government was coming. Back at headquarters, General William Garrison reached a devastating conclusion. 2 American rescue convoys had already failed. He had to abandon the idea of a unilateral U.S. action if he wanted to save his men. He made a desperate plea for international help. As we see with this white UN vehicle, the operation shifted from relying on American Humvees to commandeering heavily armored Malaysian and Pakistani peacekeeping tanks. The men of Task Force Ranger had flown into Mogadishu that afternoon, convinced of their own dominance. By midnight, they were entirely dependent on a massive multinational rescue coalition just to survive until morning. It took nearly 3 hours of brutal, block-by-block fighting for the heavily armored UN convoy to bash its way through the city and reach the first crash site. For the trapped, exhausted men, the arrival of the armor felt like a definitive end to the nightmare. They loaded their wounded, fully expecting to drive straight back to safety. But the Ranger Creed dictates you leave no man behind. Rather than flee, the troops stayed pinned down under heavy fire for hours, using bare hands and tow straps to dismantle the wreckage and free the body of the deceased helicopter pilot. When the extraction was finally complete, there wasn't enough room inside the armored vehicles for everyone. Dozens of soldiers were forced to run a gauntlet of enemy fire on foot in a desperate retreat that became known as the Mogadishu Mile. Their fierce loyalty to a fallen comrade actively overrode their own immediate self-preservation. That single decision defined the true nature of what they were doing on the ground. By the time the force reached the safety of a UN stadium 14 hours later, the human cost was staggering. 18 Americans, 1 Malaysian peacekeeper, and hundreds of Somalis were dead. The geopolitical fallout was severe. Looking at this long line of burdened soldiers walking away, you see the eventual reality of the mission. Public outrage over broadcasted casualties forced a total U.S. military withdrawal from Somalia. Yet, strictly speaking, the original tactical objective of the raid, capturing the 2 lieutenants, was technically completed in those first 15 minutes. The battle's enduring legacy was the shattering of an invincible image. The grand political directives faded away, leaving behind a stark truth about the chaos of combat. When the plan falls apart, soldiers fight exclusively to keep each other alive.